Welcome back to Upside Down Data. Let's talk about Chainlink. So if you're not familiar, Chainlink is mainly an Oracle service, basically brings information from outside of blockchains onto those blockchains so that they can use that information in things like, for example, DeFi protocols. Although Chainlink is also branching out into cross-chain communication, allowing different blockchains to communicate with each other when that's not otherwise possible. So the price action of Link, which is the token associated with Chainlink, has had some interesting price action, really going into the bear market that we had here coming out of 2021. We then hit this long range, and a lot of people during this time got very frustrated with Link, saying, why isn't Link doing anything more exciting? And then finally, we rallied out of that into late 2023, into this year. And now Link has given up some of those gains. And yet again, a lot of people are getting frustrated. But in some ways, this is not unexpected. Even if we just look at Link's price action from the past, it tends to have these periods, these long periods of sideways accumulation before its next expansion. And so what we saw here was a long period of accumulation and expansion. And now it seems like we might just have another period of accumulation ready to go. And in some ways, this price action is a little bit deceiving in that it looks very boring and underwhelming when it does something like this, for example. But when you actually look at it in context, it actually tells a slightly different story. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is the Link Bitcoin valuation. So this is the price of Link divided by the price of Bitcoin. So in other words, it's how many Link is one Bitcoin worth. That's what you're getting over here. And so really what this is telling us is relative performance. So when you see the Link Bitcoin valuation going up, that means that Link is actually outperforming Bitcoin. And when it's going down, it means that Link is underperforming Bitcoin. Now, one thing that I wanted to note that was very interesting that happened in the last bear market is take a look at what happened here from May of 2022 into December of 2022. You actually see Link outperforming Bitcoin. Now, you might look at that and say, well, how is that possible? If we look at what Link was doing over that time, it was going sideways. How is it possibly outperforming Bitcoin? We have to remember that outperformance can happen in either direction. It can either be that the asset is rallying higher than the one it's being compared to, or it's falling less than the one it's being compared to. And that's exactly what happened with Link during this time. If we pull up what Bitcoin was doing, you'll notice that Link was going sideways, this blue line here, the darker blue line, going sideways this whole time, where Bitcoin was actually continuing to fall into that FTX collapse that led to this final capitulation for Bitcoin. But then as we went into this later part of the cycle, and as we enter the new cycle, Bitcoin has been rallying quite a bit. And though Link has also rallied quite a bit, it's not been able to outperform. And what this has actually led to is sideways movement on the Link Bitcoin valuation. A lot of people have been despairing about how Link has been performing relative to Bitcoin. But actually, when you look at this chart, all that you see is it just going sideways. It's really just been this sideways move that we're seeing through here. And so that might suggest that things are not actually as bleak as a lot of people have been saying about how Link has been performing relative to Bitcoin. It's really just been chopping sideways, more or less keeping track with some volatility if you start all the way back here in mid-2022. So I do think that's some useful context. So a lot of people, when they look at Link, they're getting very kind of despairing about its price action, saying, why isn't it going up more? But if you benchmark it against Bitcoin, which is oftentimes the benchmark of the crypto space, it's actually been more or less going sideways against Bitcoin when you kind of look at this as being your reference point. So just some interesting context I wanted to give there. So now what I want to talk about is some data that relates to Link that gives us a broader picture about where it might be going next. So this is on-chain data for Link that I'm showing you here. And I think this is really cool data because really not a lot of people have this. We're somewhat unique here at the channel and on our website, polaritydigital.io, to have on-chain data for an asset like Link. Not a lot of folks have this. And it can give some really useful information about where Link currently sits in its market cycle and what's been going on. So what I'm showing you here is the realized profit and loss on the network. And so this is in dollar terms. So basically how many dollars in profit or loss are being realized on the network on a given day. And what you'll notice is that at a lot of these local tops or in these bull markets, you see a lot of profit being realized. That's these green, when anything in the green is positive. Whereas in going into bear markets, you see a lot of realized losses, a lot of capitulation. Basically, these deep red means a lot of people are capitulating out of the market, are willing to accept the loss just to get out and recoup whatever they can. So what we're seeing is that in the last cycle we saw is in this first big rally, a lot of people took profits at this first local top here. We then had this accumulation zone where it was more or less neutral, a little bit of profit, a little bit of loss, but nothing too extreme in any direction. Then as we went into this big final stretch of the bull market, you'll notice this extended period of profit taking. And that's really hard to overcome for too long. When a lot of people who bought in at these lower levels are deciding that they're done, they're ready to get out of the market and take profits at these levels, you need a lot new demand to come in to offset that selling. And ultimately that just doesn't happen forever. And really then we see price start to struggle. And then really this was the last attempt, that last big opportunity. A lot of people took profits. And then that started going into this really more negative phase where a lot of people were capitulating out of the market, going into the bear market. And really in this sideways chop, we actually took out a lot of sell pressure from this higher level. You can see this, that even though price was going sideways, it was absorbing, the market was absorbing a ton of people capitulating out. People who had bought at these higher prices, selling out at these levels, which was a sign of strength, actually, that Link was able to hold up during this time. A lot of people, be they people who were just Link bulls, who were willing to hold for the longer term, or new entrants, were able to absorb all that selling pressure. And that ultimately then gave rise to what we saw here, where a lot of people accumulated at this point. We then had a rally up, and then like what we've seen in the past with that first move up in the cycle, a lot of people taking profits, and now we're starting to calm down. And in fact, a little bit of selling happening here, which is not unusual based on what we've seen in the past. So what we can also do to visualize this a little bit differently is if we just go ahead and put on a moving average. So that's what I'm showing you here. This is the 90-day moving average of the net realized profit and loss. This gives us an idea of overall, are people taking profit or capitulating at a loss in the network? What you'll see is that at these kind of initial big moves, you get some profit taking happening, then kind of reverting back towards around zero, more profit taking, reverting back towards around zero, then a lot of profit taking happening on average across a 90-day window. Then likewise, in the bear market, you see a lot of capitulation happening in that 90-day window, eventually regressing back towards around zero, and now profit taking in this first move up. So really what I'm seeing here is that it's not too surprising what's been going on. It's also notable, this again is in dollar terms, so this is not adjusted to what the price of Link is. But we see this happening in the cycles, that in these early moves, some people take profit, but then you get a massive influx of profit taking going into whatever the top might end up being. So you got that first wave of profit taking here, but that doesn't mean it has to be the last one. And if the bull market is still going on, it would not be surprising to see Link have to range around here for a while, chop around, maybe even come a bit lower, not unlike what we've seen in the past, before we can then set the stage for that next leg up, maybe more consolidation before the final move up. So if we really are still in a bull market in broader assets, if we're not just going to go into a recession or have the stock market fall 50% or something like that, then this is totally in line with what we'd expect. With that first expansion, some big profit taking, the market then needs to digest it, new accumulation phase, which then could ultimately lead to that next leg up down the line. So from this perspective, I'm not too overly concerned yet with Link. Obviously, it's going to depend on broader markets, but as long as the bull market remains intact, and that currently remains my base case, this still seems very normal when we look at the on-chain activity here. And so if we look then at some of our other models, we also see some hopeful signs. So this is one of our risk models I'm showing you here. This is our short-term UDPI, upside downside potential indicator. It is a risk model. Higher values mean higher risk, lower values mean lower risk. So this model is reactive to moves that play out over days to weeks, so shorter in its time horizon. And you can see it does a really good job of capturing these local highs and these local lows throughout Link's history. And what we saw going into this big expansion was once again getting these really high risk levels. And I was saying at the time that it would not surprise me for Link to have to take a break after this big spike here and after this big spike here. And indeed, that's what's happened. It's more or less now just been going sideways. But notably, we've had risk really reset on the short-term time frame, all the way back down to levels that we really only see at local lows in these accumulation zones, in these kind of lows of a bear market, or in this range over here. And so it would not be surprising at all if Link could put in some kind of a short-term rally here. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be the one that breaks us up to new all-time highs or anything like that, but certainly this seems like a point where a bottom is quite logical. We've actually been seeing a bottom start to form already after this big drawdown that we saw here. And maybe this can set the stage for what that next leg up, whenever that might be coming. We've actually seen some indication for the short-term UDPI that that might be something in the cards. And if we look at our trend confidence indicator, or TCI, this also gives us some useful information about what we might expect coming out of here. So the TCI cares about trend, as the name suggests. And what you want to look at is, how is the TCI moving relative to price? Is the TCI and price moving up together, or are they going against each other? If you see the TCI start to move up aggressively, price often follows. Then when you see the TCI fall down aggressively, price will often fall to the downside as well. See the TCI moving up, price moves up with it. TCI moving down, price not doing a whole lot. Weakness to correction, TCI move up, price moves up again. And then here we saw the TCI moving down aggressively into this weakness in Link's price. But notably, look at what's happening more recently. This is what I want to focus on. The TCI is starting to move up. And in fact, it is moving up while the price of Link is going sideways. That is a sign of potential strength re-entering the market, that this weakness we saw maybe has resolved itself to some degree, and maybe we're setting that base for the next leg up. Time will tell. We'll have to see if we can really continue up on the TCI. I would like to see this kind of broader trend that we're seeing here in the TCI break to the upside as well to get more confirmation. But so far, so good. We've definitely broken out of this downward trend that we were in more recently, and that can lead to more bullish price action, especially if broader markets allow. That is a good sign. And we already know that Link has a lot of upside potential in the short term from the short-term UDPI. Maybe it's ready to start realizing this with this relative strength that's starting to show on the TCI. So a little bit more work that needs to happen to get too confident of that, but something I'm going to be watching closely. And certainly if we see price starting to show some strength from here, then I think that would be a good sign to at least maybe go back to the top of the range, if not be able to break higher, if broader markets start to look a little bit more bullish or allow for that kind of price action to happen. But certainly this is a good sign, and would not shock me, especially when we look at history of how things tend to play out, if we do see at least a short-term rally from Link from here. Of course, not financial advice. You should make your own opinions. Just something I'm going to be keeping an eye on personally. And the other reason why I think this is an interesting spot for Link is when we look at the long-term risk for Link, it's also looking favorable. So this is the long-term upside downside potential indicator. Cares about moves that play out over months to multiple months, so longer in its time horizon than the short-term version. And this is also cooled off to a way lower level, really levels we haven't seen since this range, or really these kind of low points in this accumulation zone, or all the way at the bottom back over here in 2018. But it's notable that we're hitting this same kind of level that's acted as support in these early phases of the bull market before. Are we at the same level? Is this again that early stage of the bull market, first expansion, having some time to chop around that might eventually lead to some moves up? But notably, like in these prior times, it doesn't mean we're going to go breaking off to new all-time highs immediately. We spent a long time ranging in this new level in this last cycle, 2019 going into 2020, for ultimately breaking up. And so one thing that would not surprise me at all is if we do see something like that, where on the short-term UDPI, we do realize some of the short-term upside potential, but it doesn't really get us much higher, if at all, than the top of this range here. But then ultimately what that leads into is this kind of action like we saw over here, where we're ranging, we're accumulating, we're having these value zones get hit multiple times, which were great accumulation zones for Link in the past before ultimately moving up. So it could be a patient person's game here, that we might not get that immediate reward, which is what a lot of people fixate on with crypto. They're saying, why isn't it happening right now? Give me my money. Why isn't the asset not moving up immediately? But really, it's the people who have the patience, who are able to buy at those deep value zones, to then really benefit later on. So again, not financial advice, but it is notable that we've gotten back down to those levels. Something I'm going to be watching carefully how Link reacts to being at these levels. Can we have another rally up? May not be super impressive immediately, but might be a sign of that, again, accumulation zone that could lead to that more impressive move later on. All right, so the final model I want to talk about here is our forecast model. So this looks at the probability that Link's price will be above where it is right now 6 months in the future. So the way you can read it is basically something like, for example, 0.94 would be a 94% chance that Link's price will be above where it is right now 6 months in the future, whereas something like 0.07 or 0.09 would be only a 7 or a 9% chance of upside in 6 months. So you see this model does a fantastic job of identifying the bull market, staying bullish the whole time, getting bearish throughout the bear market, and then flipping bullish again right in time for the next cycle. And it's still bullish, and that's the main thing I want to focus on right now. It remains bullish, and so when we're looking in the future, this model still thinks that a bullish outlook for Link makes more sense than a bearish outlook for Link. Now, it's obviously not up at 100%, so it's no guarantee by any means, but you'd much rather be at 92 than you would at 8, for example. We'd rather have a 92% chance of upside than an 8% chance. And so when I look at this, it still just suggests that the outlook remains bullish for Link, even though anything could happen in the short term. So I think we're at a really interesting point for Link right now, where a lot of the data suggests that the market is maybe digesting that first initial move and maybe having a bit of a reset. We're seeing that in risk as well. Risk is resetting across the board, short and long term. Some hopeful signs in the short term in terms of its trend, maybe showing some strength, but longer term, the data remain bullish. And so really what I'm going to also be looking at here is this is the picture that it's painting, that long-term bullish, even short-term things are looking bullish. And really, in my opinion, the only thing I'd be looking at that could derail that thesis is if broader markets start to collapse. If we see, for example, the stock market really fall off a cliff here, or if we see something like the dollar, which tends to be negatively correlated with crypto, continue to rally up aggressively or move up even more aggressively, that would be a concerning sign that might derail things. But unless something extreme happens there, I'm happy to follow the data personally and maintain a bullish outlook. Though I do think that patience might be the name of the game here. Like last cycle, it was not just up only, even though in retrospect it might look like that. There were long periods of time where Link did a whole lot of nothing. And you can imagine that people at the time, just like they are right now, are probably getting very frustrated and saying, why isn't it moving? What's going on? Why isn't it able to rally sustainably? Well, that's just the way that markets go. They don't go up only forever. And in these bull markets, it's really the people who have the patience to ride and wait out these boring phases that get rewarded the most. So again, not financial advice. You should make your own opinions of these data, but that's what I'm seeing right now when I think about Link. All right, if you like the content, subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us over on X. A lot of updates for our models and more over there. You can go to our website, polaritydigital.io, to see live data from our models, on-chain data, and more.